Welcome to this video. Today we're going to talk about what exactly the law of Moses is, and what the law says. Let's explore this topic and gain a better understanding of what the law entails. Let's start with a definition of the law. In the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, we find all the charge, commandments, statutes, and laws that were given to Moses, and then passed on to the people of Israel. These laws are often referred to as the law of Moses, or the law of God. In total, according to the rabbis, there are 613 laws in the Old Testament. To gain a better understanding of the different parts of the law, it is important to look at the meanings of some terms in Hebrew. The Hebrew word for law is torâ, which can be translated as law, instruction, or teaching. This word appears more than 200 times in the Old Testament. In addition, we have the word miṣvâ, which means commandments, precept, ordinances, or law, and appears 181 times in the Old Testament. So the word law appears very often in the Bible, such as in Genesis 26. Genesis 26 verse 4 says, "And by your descendants all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." But why did God give the law? The law was intended to teach the people and help them live holy lives. God himself is perfect and holy, and he wanted the people of Israel to be holy too. The goal was not to impose arbitrary rules, but to show people what was right and just. So the law itself is holy and righteous, just like God himself. It was an expression of God's character. Paul confirms this in the letter to the Romans in chapter 7, verse 12, where he says, "So then the law is holy, and the commandment is holy and righteous and good." When we look at the Bible, we see that God continually asks for obedience to his laws and commandments. For example, in Leviticus 19, verse 2, he says, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." The law which was given to Moses was logically structured. Before the law was given to Moses, God spoke to the people and explained what they could expect if they made a covenant with him. This served as an introduction to all the commandments and covenants that God would make with them. It gave the Israelites insight into how God would bless them if they obeyed the law. Exodus 19, verse 5. "Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." This meant that if the Israelites kept the commandments, they would be a holy nation set apart for God. They would serve as an example to other nations and show how they should live. After this introduction, God proclaimed the law and the covenants to Israel. The law can be divided into several main groups and parts. Let's look at the different parts of the law and what the Bible tells us about them. The first main group is the 10 Commandments, as described in Exodus 20. These commandments, given by God himself, form the basis of the book of the law. Then we have different legal rules about different parts. There were rules about loving God, manslaughter, abuse, negligence, marriages, idolatry, dealing with vulnerable people, eating animals, and much more. Another important category is worship. This includes all regulations and rules regarding worship and sacrifices in the tabernacle. Here we find topics such as the heave offering, burnt offering, grain offering, peace offering, sin offering, and trespass offering. Furthermore, we have rules regarding the dwelling place of God, stating what the tabernacle was to look like. Consider the Ark of the Covenant, the table for the showbread, the bronze altar, the altar of incense, the copper laver, and the ordinances of the priests. And finally, the law of Moses consisted of various blessings and curses. These passages tell us about the blessings the people would receive if they obeyed the law, and the curses that would follow if they broke the law. The blessings were about the promised land, God's guidance, protection, victory, healing, fertility of people and animals, abundance of possessions, food and fertile land. The curses were opposite, such as illness, death, barrenness, drought, financial shortages, exile, and fear. Each part of the law is important and contributes to the overall structure and meaning of the law. They represent God's commandments to his people, so they knew how to obey him and how to live. Although these laws were specific to the people of Israel, we can still learn lessons from them about obedience, righteousness, and holiness. Let us take a closer look at some points of the law of Moses. The heart of the law, therefore, consisted of the 10 Commandments, also known as the 10 Words. These commandments were given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai, and they formed the basis for all other legal rules that followed. In Deuteronomy 10 verse 3, Moses says, "So I made an ark of acacia wood, and cut out 2 tablets of stone like the former ones. and went up on the mountain with the 2 tablets in my hand. He wrote on the tablets like the former writing, the 10 commandments which the Lord had spoken to you on the mountain, from the midst of the fire on the day of the assembly. And the Lord gave them to me. The 10 commandments are: 1. Do not worship other gods besides the God of Israel. 2. Do not make idols or bow down to them. 3. Do not misuse the name of God. 4. Remember the Sabbath. 5. Show respect for parents. 6. Don't kill anyone. 7. Do not commit adultery. 8. Don't steal. 9. Do not bear false witness. 10. Do not covet someone else's housewife or anything that belongs to anyone else. By keeping these commandments, the people showed love for God and love for their fellow man. Each commandment had an important purpose for the well-being of the Israelites and for God to dwell among them. These commandments were not merely advice or exhortations, but binding regulations that the people had to observe. In addition to the 10 commandments, many other laws were also given in the books of Moses. Some of these laws were given to Moses on Mount Sinai, while others were given at various times in the wilderness, in response to questions or requests from the people. In these laws, we can distinguish between moral laws and civil laws. Moral laws are based on good norms and values, and guide us in our daily lives to act according to the right norms. For example, these laws prohibit lying, assault, and false testimony. Civil laws, on the other hand, as we know them in our own civil code, provide specific rules and regulations about how we should interact with each other. They flow from the moral laws and provide practical guidance. An example of this is the importance of reliability in business. In America, we have drawn up laws to ensure that companies keep good records and pay taxes correctly. It is important to note that many of these civil laws in the Bible were specific to the people of Israel. They were intended to guide the people and help them build a just society. For example, consider the following text, which specifically helped the nation of Israel, but is now no longer needed due to toilets. Deuteronomy 23 verse 13. And you shall have a spade among your tools, and it shall be when you sit down outside. You shall dig with it and shall turn to cover up your excrement. There were also penalties associated with breaking the law. God would bless the people if they were obedient, but if they disobeyed, there would be curse and punishment. Various laws also provided specific penalties if this law was broken. For example, if someone stole cattle and slaughtered or sold them, he had to pay 5 times the value of the stolen animal. If anyone bore false witness, he would be inflicted with the same punishment he had devised for the other. In addition to these punishments for transgressions, God also wanted atonement in the form of burnt offerings or sacrifices for sins. These sacrifices were intended to represent the sacrifice that Jesus Christ would make to atone for the sins of humanity. Finally, there were also ceremonial laws in the law of Moses that pertained to the tabernacle of God worship and the feasts to be celebrated. This is a brief overview of the content of the law in the Bible. It gives us insight into the commandments and regulations that God gave to the people of Israel. Although many of these laws were specific to Israel, we can still learn from the principles and values contained in the law. The law of Moses was intended to bless the people and cause them to walk in obedience to God. Unfortunately, the Israelites often chose to disobey, thereby experiencing the curse of this law. The greatest curse was the exile, in which the people were expelled from their land and lived under the yoke of foreign nations. However, God had a plan to bless the people, but they had to make the choice between obedience and blessing, or disobedience and curse. This is a lesson we can apply to our own lives. Obedience to God's commandments brings blessings, while disobedience can lead to consequences. Deuteronomy 30 verse 19 says, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today, that I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. So choose life in order that you may live, you and your descendants. Thank you for watching this video about the contents of the Law of Moses. I hope you have gained new insights into the laws and regulations that God gave to the people of Israel.